हम तेरे बिन अब रह नहीं सकते तेरे बिना क्या वजूद मेरा.
You are listening to Awaz Community Radio with me, your host Saira. Today we have two guests in the studio. We'll be talking about forced marriages, a very serious but very relevant topic.
तुझसे जुदा अगर हो जाएंगे तो खुद से ही हो जाएंगे जुदा.
If you would like to get in touch with us to discuss this topic, our email address is awazradio@hotmail.com. You can ring us 0161 839 7857. You can log on to our website www.awazcommunityradio.com. Thank you. You are listening to Awaz Community Radio. And my guests in the studio today are Tahra and Noreen. Both have an educational background. Thank you for coming in, Tahra and Noreen.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting us.
Well, we are very interested in having this discussion today about forced marriages.
Forced marriages, as Saira's just said, are incredibly relevant, aren't they still, Saira? I find it staggering that in 2013 it's a subject that we still feel important enough to debate, particularly within the Asian community. It's one that has been raised over and over, but sadly still one I think that we need to debate further and actually discuss and actually face up to the problems that we are facing in that area.
So can you tell me, what is defined as a forced marriage? What is that?
Forced marriage essentially is something that is relevant in terms of somebody who goes into a relationship in a marriage where they're actually taking on a legal document, a legal binding agreement, but actually they have come into it not consenting adults. Either one or both parties have actually not consented to it, and it may actually be for many reasons. It may be a case of the adults are actually quite sound in terms of their decision-making abilities, but actually it's also relevant for people who may have mental health problems or disabilities of some description in terms of mental disabilities, where they're actually not even able to consent, but that consent has been given on behalf of them by somebody else.
Is there more forced marriages between adults in UK, or are they marriages from a person in UK and abroad?
My understanding is that statistically it's predominantly happening with adults that are marriages that are taking place within the South Asian community between children that are here or grown-up adults that are here, and back home, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and that area. That said, there are a significant number of marriages that take place in other communities as well, but predominantly is an Asian community problem. Statistically, I think, for example, in the Northwest, 17% of the cases are reported to the forced marriage unit. These are the actual reported cases. 17% of those are actually within the Asian community in the Northwest, which is quite frightening.
I'm very surprised at that in the Northwest. In particular, which cities?
I think the statistics actually don't sort of split it up, but I suspect it is to do predominantly with areas like Manchester, where we have a very large Asian community anyway.
How do they get these statistics, just out of interest?
These are actual people who ring up and say, we have a problem, my parents are trying to force me into a marriage. So these are actual reported cases that have actually been dealt with. And that has probably got to be the tip of the iceberg, simply because a policeman friend of mine told me only a few days ago that very many cases that come to them actually never get any further than the initial contact. A little bit, I think, Saira, would you not agree? A little bit like the cases historically that used to be rape cases or the very, very difficult cases where the person comes in but actually hasn't got the courage or for whatever reason pulls out.
Yes, I think sometimes one of the issues in recognising what a forced marriage is that some children, now we keep going back to the fact we say children, but really we do mean adults, and I'm sure we'll come back to that later as to why we keep saying children.
Could I just stop you there, Saira?
Sure.
Actually, I think it's interesting that we keep using that word children, because actually children do get arranged into a marriage at a very early age. Even I am aware of in my family and friends that some children become engaged to another party before even the age of 10. I think people need to be aware of that. I think it's decided very early on that we are going to match these children to this family. So I think that's why it keeps cropping up verbally between ourselves.
For many reasons, you're absolutely right on that one. And I think you're using 10 as a sort of cut-off point, but I can certainly go well below that. I think we can certainly come up with the examples, personal examples in personal families that we're aware of, but it might have happened even significantly earlier than that. Interesting, the moment you said that, I sort of thought of a family member who was betrothed, being the word, much earlier than that, and that when they became adults, was sort of seen through. But the other reason for using the word children is that in our communities, one of the things that happens predominantly is the fact that so long as you're living at your parents' home, you are a child. You are their child. That relationship, that bond between the parent and the child becomes one of child and adult, and you don't actually sort of move into a domain where you're actually seen as an adult.
So it's a case of, well, I'm sure a lot of Western families, you see this as well. If you're living under your parents' roof, it's their rules.
Yeah.
And this goes one step further, where one of the rules includes, you live with us, it means you are betrothed to who we feel is a suitable match for you. So it's the parents insisting on taking that decision for them, for the child, well, who is now a grown-up adult. So these parents who are part of the whole forced marriages situation, do you think that many of them have been forced into marriages themselves?
Yes, I think they absolutely have. I think it's been going on from generation to generation, I think many generations.
Force can be subtle, can't it? I think that's part of the problem. Force can be very, very subtle and actually sort of there from the word go, where you feel that as an adult, once you're actually broached and you said, will you marry this person, you may actually not even be aware at that point that you have a choice. You actually just walk into it. And perhaps historically our parents, the generation above us, have always done that. It's a foregone conclusion. Your parents say, you're going to marry such and such. Not a question. It's not a question at that point. You're going to marry such and such.
Yes, you're right. I think it's, in fact, it's interesting you brought that up. I think sometimes being married is more a priority to even being educated in some families. I think they start putting the seeds of marriage before even giving them a vision of education and standing up to themselves. It's such a basic part of their development, and I think the seeds are put in early on from the age in some way or another. So it's such an essential part of bringing up a child in the marriage strand right from an early age.
Which presumably is part of the reasons when some parents get hysterical, almost to the point of actually becoming really upset at the thought of actually having a girl, because that then begins to be seen as a burden. And that burden then becomes entrenched in terms of other worries and concerns. And later on in life, as you say, the forced marriage bit may actually just be an extension of that.
जैसे कोई दुआ तो रूह की राहत है, तू मेरी इबादत है, अपने करम की कर अदाएं कर दे इधर भी तू निगाहें.
Welcome back after that break. You are listening to Awaz Community Radio with me, your host Saira, and we have guests today, Tahra and Noreen, talking about the very serious topic of forced marriages.
Hello again.
Hi to everyone.
So, Tahra, about forced marriages, we were talking before the break about how even grown adults are seen as children by their parents who have had to have their marriages forced on themselves.
That may well be the crux of the matter, because I think it boils down to control. One of, as a parent, regardless of my age and the age of the grown-up child at that point, and they can't possibly be children, otherwise they can't go into a marriage. The person who's going into a marriage is an adult. And it may simply boil down to a case of control. Control in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. We control lots of things with our children. We control when they go to bed. We control what they eat. We control in many ways. But often, and naturally, that control should be to do with the welfare of the child and to actually benefit that child. However, when that boundary is crossed into controlling for personal gain and not the gain of the child, that's where some of the conflict arises and problems arise.
That is where the conflict is, where parents believe that the match is in the benefit of the child. Isn't that really the big problem here, where parents think that they are doing the right thing?
Not necessarily, because I think that could actually be a fundamental part of arranged marriages. Arranged marriages in themselves are not necessarily bad. There are lots and lots of arranged marriages that actually are very happy and sound marriages based on sound beginnings, where the adults get together and say, yes, I know my child well, my daughter has certain personalities, that young man actually is of certain background, I know the young man well, they will make a good match together, and works brilliantly, absolutely fine, no issues. However,
I think that for daughters, which you brought up earlier on, I think sometimes parents do feel their daughters are vulnerable, and they are more likely to arrange a marriage or even a forced marriage for their daughter, just simply for reasons for protection. I think they feel more secure in themselves and for their daughter if they think they have got the right match for them.
Self-created problems by the Asian community. It's interesting you said that they're protecting the daughters. Well, who are they protecting them from?
Perhaps from matches they feel are unsuitable. That perhaps that, for example, if a daughter has found a match, then perhaps some parents will feel that that man is either A, too poor, B, of, now we haven't discussed the caste system yet.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the caste system still exists.
Absolutely.
And people discriminate on basis of caste. She may be told that
Mm-hmm.
man is too poor to look after you, or he is below you because of the caste system.
But it's controlling behaviour. It is about
Yes.
controlling their behaviour and controlling what we would consider unwanted behaviour or behaviour that are inappropriate. Again, as I would stress, that in itself is not a bad thing, because we manage our children's behaviour. I have grown-up children now, and I would say I have spent my life managing my children's behaviour. I have very beautiful, wonderful two adults now, and not necessarily all thanks to me, because they bring their own personalities and values to life too. However, we manage our children. We manage the fact we're not going to send them out on the streets in the town centre after 9 o'clock at a certain age, because as adults we have to protect them and manage them. However, this is managing in a different manner, which is actually saying that the person that you're going to select for yourself is deemed inappropriate. We keep emphasizing and we keep coming back to this business about protecting daughters, but who are we protecting them from? We don't have to seem to have the same need or stresses in our lives as Asian parents to protect the boys. Is that not part and parcel of the problem here?
Do you feel perhaps there are some boys who are forced into marriages? Do you think that's
15%.
underreported?
15% according to the official statistics, but probably underreported again,
I
in the
think
same
it's-
way as the girls are.
I think it's underreported. I think it's a lot higher than 15%. I think it's just...
Is it harder for men to admit that they've been forced into a marriage
It
by
would
their
be.
parents?
I think...
In any
they-
culture. In any culture, in the same way as domestic abuse among men would be underreported. It's on par with that.
Do you think that, I mean, we're talking about forced marriages. I mean, what we haven't mentioned is the role of religion in forced marriages. Do you think that Asian parents are confused with the role of religion or what knowledge they have,
No.
and they think it's part of
No,
the religion to
No,
force
no,
them into
no.
some kind of suitable partner?
I suspect not. I think my sort of gut feeling on that is religion is very clear cut. The big religions, for example, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Sikhism, Hinduism, all fundamentally, absolutely within the marriage rituals, absolutely categorically ask for consent of the two people in that relationship. Absolutely, that is fundamental to the religious ritual.
It would appear, though, I know from my own experience with people in the community, there are people who are aware of parents using perhaps their own religion in order to coerce their children. For example, saying, well, if you don't do this, you're not just displeasing me, you're displeasing the God that we believe in.
I agree. I think that does happen in a good percentage of our community. But as Tahra said, religiously, even I know that if two adults, and if one of them or both of them are not consenting, it's actually not a legal marriage.
It's not, you're right.
But it's back to coercion, isn't it?
It is, yes. Now, listeners, if you would like to talk to us about this topic, you can email us on awazradio@hotmail.com. You can ring us 0161 839 7857. All calls will be taken in confidence.
प्यार में हम खुशी से यूं भर जाएंगे, हम मर जाएंगे, हो हम मर जाएंगे। मेरे यारा तेरे गम अगर पाएंगे, हम तेरी है कसम, हम सवर जाएंगे।
चाहे दुख हो चाहे सुख हो, दिल ने तुझको ही पुकारा। तूने हमको है बनाया, तूने हमको है सवारा। जहाँ को तो रब का है, हमें तेरा है सहारा। बस तेरा साथ हो, चाहे जो बात हो, बस तेरा साथ हो, चाहे जो बात हो। तेरे कहने से कर जाएंगे, हम मर जाएंगे, ओ हम मर जाएंगे। हाँ मेरे यारा तेरे गम अगर पाएंगे, हमें तेरी है कसम, हम सवर जाएंगे।
मेरे यारा तेरे गम अगर पाएंगे, हम तेरी है कसम।
You are listening to Awaz Community Radio with me, your host Saira, and we have Tahra and Noreen in the studio discussing forced marriages. So, Tahra and Noreen, can you talk to me about the reasons behind these forced marriages? Why are forced marriages common?
Very complicated reasons, and I think there are probably as many reasons as there are individual cases. However, there are some similar themes that are actually coming through, and if you look on some of the official websites, the police websites and government websites, they often sort of quote some of the reasons that are given. And one of the reasons can actually be very simple as peer pressure or family pressure to keep the relationships of cousin marriages going, where the families actually keep various things within themselves in terms of controlling wealth, controlling essentially not going. There is this whole thing about not going outside the community to wed your children outside that. And some of the other reasons may well be just simple controlling of their children and wanting to have an impact on what they're actually doing.
Do you think they're scared of arranging marriage with adults outside their family systems? Some of the parents, they're actually scared.
Well,
Do they have fears? What are their fears?
they may have fears, but often the fears are unfounded because they're actually just fears to do with unknown quantity in terms of not knowing what's out there. However, there is such a solid practice of arranged marriage between cousins, for example, that a lot of people actually just find it hard to sort of move away from that. So, for example, a person who may still have a brother or sister abroad in Pakistan who wants their child to come over, it may be as basic as that.
And I think, adding on to that, I think the economy of Pakistan makes a huge difference to all these forced and arranged marriages. I think there are many parties from there who would prefer a marriage from someone in UK simply because it's used as a resource.
Well, economic
economically.
migrants is something that's fundamental. It's, goes on in every community and will go on in the European community for various reasons as well. Yes, that actually can become a part of that. But in terms of keeping wealth within the family, if you've got wealthy families who do not want to see their wealth hard-earned money to going outside the community, to outside the immediate family, can be another reason. So in that sense, economy does play a part, yes. But often it's not to do with that, is it? It's much more fundamental than that. It's to do with, for example, a father may simply say, you're going to marry X and Y and Z because this will benefit my brother's child in some way. So it's not about your own child. It's about the father then absolutely controlling the family's future direction, by instilling a fear in them and saying that you will follow my rules.
I agree. I also think it's to do with what the adults think is respect. I think if, say, for example, their son or daughter chooses to marry someone out of what people's criteria thinks is a suitable partner, I think they will put on them a forced marriage to bring them back into line, so that they hold this respect within their community.
The honour thing, the whole honour issue.
The whole idea of izzat and sharam,
Yes.
honour and respect.
I think to add to that, I can understand where parents are coming from that. However, I think the way forward isn't to abuse their child if they decide to have a relationship with someone else or are thinking of. I think the way forward is to talk to their child and give them a choice and kind of lay out the consequences if there is a partner who isn't suitable. I mean, there may be partners who aren't suitable. It might be someone who's drug addicted, or I'm talking about issues like that.
I think that's probably a tip of the iceberg. That may not actually be a criteria in most cases. I think that may be used as a factor to coerce your child into believing that what you're doing is correct, because actually some of the damage that is done through some of these things is actually to the family and to the adults far more than the child themselves. And yes, the consequences for the young person involved may be absolutely devastating. However, the whole families can be absolutely devastated by it. The case of Shafilia in Warrington only a couple of years ago would be a prime example of that. She wanted to marry outside the system, as the reported cases go in media. However, the father and the mother decided that she wasn't towing the line, and extreme measures were taken where she was actually killed. And it's come to light since that it was basically boiling down to the fact that she was choosing a partner that was deemed unsuitable. However, you've now got two adults in prison for life, a younger sibling who is absolutely running riot and actually doing her own thing and has lost a family structure. You've got a dead child who's a 17-year-old young girl with the whole future ahead of herself. So it is actually, where does one actually sort of say, is that and sharam is to do with that? Hasn't that actually crossed that boundary completely?
Does the community perhaps need more education? I think the word education is the one that's coming to my mind, about what what sharam really is. Because, like you've just said, isn't it worse to go to jail? Isn't it worse to lose your child? And not just lose your child, obviously that's every parent's worst nightmare, to lose your child. However, but to actually do that to your own child, is that really a step that parents should ever consider? I mean, we three obviously agree that it's not something that anybody should do, but why is that an option for some parents?
I think education is very, very useful and very important point to home in on, because I think what perhaps has happened at that point, if you've got to a position where you are going to take such drastic measures, absolutely heinous, hideous measures, where you are forced or feel obliged of in some way okay about the fact you're going to kill this person, then at that point communication, education, knowledge, all that has come to a point where it's actually beyond repair and needs to be present much, much, much earlier.
हम तेरे बिन अब रह नहीं सकते, तेरे बिना क्या वजूद मेरा, तुझसे जुदा अगर हो जाएंगे तो खुद से ही हो जाएंगे जुदा, क्योंकि तुम ही हो, अब तुम ही हो जिंदगी, अब तुम ही हो चैन भी, मेरा दर्द भी, मेरी आशिकी, अब तुम ही हो। पल दूर गवारा नहीं, तेरे लिए हर रोज है जीते, तुझको दिया मेरा वक्त सभी, कोई लम्हा मेरा ना हो तेरे बिना, हर सांस पे नाम तेरा, क्योंकि तुम ही हो, अब तुम ही हो जिंदगी, अब तुम ही हो चैन भी, मेरा दर्द भी, मेरी आशिकी, अब तुम ही हो। तेरे लिए ही जिया मैं खुद को जो यूं दे दिया है, तेरी वफा ने मुझको संभाला, सारे गमों को दिल से निकाला, तेरे साथ मेरा है नसीब जुड़ा, तुझे पाके अधूरा न रहा, क्योंकि तुम ही हो, अब तुम ही हो जिंदगी, अब तुम ही हो चैन भी, मेरा दर्द भी, मेरी आशिकी, अब तुम ही हो, क्योंकि तुम ही हो, अब तुम ही हो जिंदगी, अब तुम ही हो चैन भी, मेरा दर्द भी, मेरी आशिकी, अब तुम ही हो।
Thank you for listening to Awaz Community Radio with me, your host Saira, and we have Tahra and Noreen in the studio talking about forced marriages. If this topic would like you to get in touch with us about any help that you need, any support or any important numbers, please do ring us. It's 0161 839 7857. You can email us awazradio@hotmail.com, and you can log on to our website www.awazcommunityradio.com. So we're talking about forced marriages today, and we're talking about the importance of education.
Education has got to be key somewhere along the line, hasn't it? And I think not perhaps necessarily in the formal way that we understand education, because I think, we sort of associate that with colleges and schools and universities, although I think they have a very fundamental place. I mean, universities and graduate students who talk in universities and have debate societies are fundamental to that. I think young people need to sort of address these issues. However, I think sometimes, for me personally, I think one of the areas that's not receiving that much impact in terms of education and debate is the adults themselves, who are perhaps of a generation where they're still of the opinion that it's easy to blame somebody else for the whole issue. And actually, I believe it's not even an issue. I have spoken to a friend recently who basically said, it's one of the making of the Western community who actually exaggerate the problem. It's not really a problem. We're okay with it. It's not, the arranged marriages aren't that big a deal, which is quite frightening.
How would we educate these adults?
My take on that is that it doesn't need to be formally in a way that you and I understand, because I mean I'm a classroom-based teacher. You sort of teach children face to face that in that manner. But I think this needs to be debated. For me personally, I think one area that needs to be addressed is in the communities themselves, within the mosques, within community centres, within women's groups, where they might actually sit down and actually talk in groups. I think one of the other things that's happening quite on a fairly large scale at the moment is young women are taking up, for example, Islam in a big way, and they're quite keen. Young women are quite keen to debate Islam in a very big way, and they'll get together as groups. I know a fair number of girls who will get together on a fairly regular basis and actually sort of thrash issues out and enlighten each other about Islamic values. That would be an excellent forum, for example, to debate that.
So you think that the children, which are adults, should be teaching their parents?
Yes and no, because I think the adults themselves need to address it. As I said, this friend of mine who is of a slightly bit older generation feels that it's not an issue, and I think they need to address it, and they need to sort of actually acknowledge. I think that's partly the other problem, acknowledging that we actually have an issue, we actually have a problem in the community.
I think, as you said, I think in the community, I think where there are Islamic talks for adults, women or males, I think the teachers there should be interacted with and making programs with them to deal with this issue as a public talk, because they do public talks about many other issues, and I think this should be something that they should regularly present and discuss with the parties there.
So do you feel it's not been addressed? Do you feel they're not willing to address it?
I don't actually. I think it should be addressed more regularly, not just as a one-off.
Do you know, when you go to a fair or a mela, you often see stalls where you're getting support for, helping to stop smoking, for healthy eating, reducing your alcohol consumption. Perhaps, do you think we need more awareness of the fact that there are forced marriages happening? I'm just thinking of an idea where I know a stall perhaps isn't the best thing, but maybe even something that was up saying, here are numbers if you feel you are in that kind of situation. Do you feel we need to have that kind of presence at Asian cultural events?
We do need presence, but I think again that presence needs to be done very, very carefully, because I think the danger, and I understand where some people are coming from when they worry about this issue, because the danger can very well be that we actually feed into the National Front kind of attitudes, where they feel, aha, there you go again, you see, bad people. These are bad people, they do horrible things. And I think to actually sort of perpetuate some of those nasty myths that go on out there. So I think it does need to be handled with incredible careful strategies, which actually don't actually build on the damage. Because I think if you build in some of those if you address negative issues, it's very, very easy to actually sort of go down the route of saying, yes, there are bad things happening. I think there have to be issues that can be debated openly. However, perhaps what you're really saying, I suspect, Saira, is that the information perhaps just isn't available widely enough to our youngsters. Perhaps the children need to have wider access to this information.
Maybe seeing something about forced marriages will get women of all generations talking more about this subject rather than sweeping it under the carpet.
Do you think secondary schools are a good starting point? Because that's the age where I think it starts getting serious. And I think maybe if parents were called in and there was an open discussion, I'm not really sure how to start it or in what way, but would it be a good point to start at?
It could be an area that you start at. I don't think we should dismiss or ignore any areas that we could actually have an impact on. However, I suspect sometimes even by secondary age, the damage is so entrenched, so solid, that actually the damage may be already done, and it's hard to sort of pull away from that. I've certainly taught children who get to a position in secondary schools where they're cutting themselves, where they're actually self-harming because they can see the pressure and the damage that their families are going to cause them, and they can't fight it.
So would you say primary school is the level to start at?
I think you have to be very careful in primary school. I think it may be something too much. Are we talking about the parents here or the children?
I thought we were talking about the children.
The children, I think I don't think they're ready to deal with this area. I think it's too much for them. I think emotionally, I don't think they're ready, or it needs to be done in a really subtle, careful, delicate way. But I think we're on dangerous grounds. With parents, I don't think we are. But I think with children, I personally feel uncomfortable with that.
I'm not sure how I would speak to, well, a primary school aged child about the topic of forced marriages, to be honest. I mean, we would have to, I agree, be very delicate, very careful with what language we used.
I think perhaps in many, many ways it may not even be relevant in the sense of you certainly would want to talk about relationships. You certainly would want to talk about personal rights that you have as a child, as an adult, as a person, things that you shouldn't be forced into things. So under those umbrellas, you could actually sort of raise these issues. But perhaps the words forced marriages, because the word marriage may actually not be relevant at that age group anyway.
All right, so perhaps towards the end of junior school, where they have that talk about personal development, your body's changing, and there is some talk about relationships, you mean including the topic of forced marriages, the idea behind it, that you are to consent, whatever you do, your consent is important. Is that what you mean? Absolutely,
because I think you don't need to sort of go down the route of saying forced marriage, because that is immediately going to a negative area, and you can actually sort of develop ideas that somehow marriage is bad and somehow arranged marriage is bad. Whereas if you actually sort of address it from the point of view, you have these rights. This is what an arranged marriage might be. Might be purely in terms of cultural differences. You know, there is nothing wrong with the Muslim community or whichever group you're from actually having arranged marriages.
खिलेंगी जहाँ बाहर सभी मुझे तो वहाँ पाएगा रहेगी जहाँ हमारी वफा मुझे तो वहाँ पाएगा मिलूंगा मैं इससे तरह वादा रहा रहूंगा संग में सदा वादा रहा तुझे जीना है मेरे बिना देना मुझे है अलविदा तुझे तुझे जीना है मेरे बिना तुझे जीना है हाँ मेरे बिना
अपनी आँखें खाली कर दे काश तू मेरी आँखें भर दे काश तू मेरी आँखें भर दे मेरे यारा तेरे गम अगर पाएंगे हम तेरी है कसम हम सवर जाएंगे हो मेरे यारा तेरे गम अगर पाएंगे हम तेरी है कसम हम सवर जाएंगे तो ये सौगात तुम तो ज़माने की हम तो ये सौगात तुम तो ज़माने की हम हर खुशी से मुकर जाएंगे हम मर जाएंगे हो हम मर जाएंगे मेरे यारा तेरे गम अगर पाएंगे हम तेरी है कसम हम सवर जाएंगे तेरे कांधे से ही लग के यारा बीते उम्र सारी सोचो कैसी होगी किस्मत हुआ यूं तो फिर हमारी सारे आंसू तो हो तेरे और आंखें हो हमारी तेरे दर्द हमें जो मिले प्यार में तेरे दर्द हमें जो मिले प्यार में हम खुशी से यूं भर जाएंगे हम मर जाएंगे हो हम मर जाएंगे मेरे यारा तेरे गम अगर पाएंगे हम तेरी है कसम हम सवर जाएंगे
चाहे दुख हो चाहे सुख हो दिल ने तुझको ही पुकारा तूने हमको है बनाया तूने हमको है सवारा जहाँ को तो रब का है हमें तेरा है सहारा बस तेरा साथ हो चाहे जो बात हो बस तेरा साथ हो चाहे जो बात हो तेरे कहने से कर जाएंगे हम मर जाएंगे ओ हम मर जाएंगे ये गम अगर पाएंगे.
Thank you for listening to Awaz Community Radio. You're listening to your host Saira and guests Tahra and Noreen talking about forced marriages.
अगर पाएंगे हम तेरी है कसम हम.
If you would like to get in touch with us about this very serious issue, you can email us awazradio@hotmail.com. You can ring us 0161 839 7857, or you can log on to our website www.awazcommunityradio.com.
आसान नहीं यहाँ आशिक हो जाना, पलकों पे कांटों को सजाना. आशिक को मिलती है गम की सौगातें, सबको ना मिलता ये खजाना. ओ बातों से आगे, वादों से आगे, देखो जरा तुम कभी. ओ ये तो है शोला, ये है चिंगारी, ये है जवाग भी. ओ
Welcome back. Thank you for listening to Awaz Community Radio. So, any final thoughts, Tahra and Noreen, about the topic we've been talking about of forced marriages?
Thank you, Saira. Yes, I do. I think one of the first things I'd like to say is, although I should have said this right at the end, but I will say it all right now. I think thank you for actually inviting us to talk about this subject, because I think, as we were saying earlier about education and that side of things, the very fact that we're able to sort of debate the subject and actually talk about it, raise it as an issue, is for me really important, because I think any one single forced marriage is one single forced marriage too many. The good thing, of course, I think, is the fact that we're not talking about huge numbers. We're talking about numbers that are fairly large, statistically speaking. However, they're not huge in terms of the total number of marriages. The large number of marriages in the Asian communities are okay. They're actually good marriages. They're actually very healthy marriages. They're actually very happy marriages. So let's work on how to eliminate the bad factors within that system.
And to add to that, there are marriages where the parents do choose a partner for their child, and the child is very, very happy to accept that partner, and they grow up thinking about that partner and even having a healthy marriage with that person.
But isn't that a fundamental part and parcel of an arranged marriage? Arranged marriage, as I said before, can actually be very happy and very healthy. So the good arranged marriage is based on the fact that a parent may actually know what is actually best for you and actually choose a partner that's actually very suitable for you. And in that sense, are actually doing it for your benefit and for your well-being, which is very, very important, given that given the length of time we actually live these days, and the government is addressing that in lots of ways, aren't they, in terms of pensions and things. Given the large amount of time we may actually spend with that person, 50 odd years in some cases, isn't it fundamental and absolutely paramount that we choose and are happy with that partner? So in that sense, a lot of arranged marriages are very good, because they do that. However, the problem arises when that is abused for personal gain, for personal control, for personal benefit, at the expense of that young person.
I agree. And also, if the child or adult decides not to marry the person their parents choose for them, I think they should have the right to say no. And if their parents do not agree with that, there should be laws out there to support that person.
It is good to have a law, I think, because I think that gives a clarity, that makes it black and white, that tells you fundamentally that if you are even thinking about it, it's actually wrong.
I once heard on This Morning, actually, a psychologist on This morning, and he said the final thing that controls a person is fear. And if a parent fears the law, it may make a difference.
It is sad that we're using the word fear, because fear should not come into something that is actually sometimes described as the best day of your life. Frequently we're sold on this fairy tale idea in children's books, etc., where children talk about the most important day of my life, the most happiest day of my life, and that is essentially what it ought to be, because it should be the beginning of a very nice, fruitful relationship with another adult.
So going back to your point about forced marriages law, at present there is no law which bans forced marriages outright, but there are existing laws which can be used, and there is a forced marriages unit that people can seek out.
You're absolutely right, there currently is no law which actually says it's actually banned. However, there are, as you've just said, Saira, very clearly, that there are laws around it which would actually stop that happening in some way. For example, abducting a child, coercing a child, forcing a child, abusing a child, physically abusing the child is wrong, and you can actually end up in prison for those crimes.
So if someone would like details of where to get support from, you can contact us on 0161 839 7857. You can email us awazradio@hotmail.com. We can provide details for how you can get support if you're in a situation you feel is a forced marriage situation. So I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you very, very much, Noreen, Tahra, for your contributions, for your time, for a topic which sometimes unfortunately gets brushed under the carpet in our community.
Thank you, Saira, very, very much for inviting us, because I think the very fact that you're willing and able to actually address this issue and give us a platform to actually do that from, I'm thoroughly pleased, and good on you.
And thank you, Saira, again for inviting us. And I hope that people listening out there will contact Awaz Radio if they need any advice or support.
I'm sure they will. You've both been really helpful, and it's great to hear from people who have a background which has involved being in touch with, in the Asian community, with people who have needed support over the issue. This is Awaz Community Radio. Your host has been Saira. Your guests have been Tahra and Noreen. Thank you very much for listening.
मेरा दर्द भी मेरी आशिकी